Hey everybody, I'm Robert Miller. I'm a steward at Flashbots. I'm going to be talking to you today about some lessons that we've learned from the MEV maze. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. Unfortunately, had to be away for the weekend. So I am a steward at Flashbots. Also, I lead the product organization. We are a research and development organization dedicated to MEV, or minor extractable value. We'll get up into what that means in a moment. We discovered MEV, and since then we've been creating markets and infrastructure for it for about 4 or so years. I'm a long-term Bitcoin fan here, and although we primarily deploy infrastructure on Ethereum, I'm here to talk about MEV, not Ethereum. And hopefully there are some things that you can learn about MEV and they're applicable to Bitcoin and the Bitcoin community. Where do we begin with MEV? So MEV was discovered in 2019, or at least formalized in this paper, Flashboys 2.0 by Phil Diane, Flashbots steward as well. It is the value that a miner could extract by reordering, inserting, or censoring transactions. So it sort of realizes that miners, as the party who has a monopoly over transaction ordering within a block, they have a lot of power to do things to transactions in the block, and they could extract a lot of money in particular. So a good example of this is if there's a big trade on a decentralized exchange, then a miner is the party who ultimately has the ability to capture that trade by inserting their own arbitrage. And if someone else inserted their own arbitrage, a miner is going to be able to beat them out because they control what goes into the block ultimately. And so this insight meant that miners could extract a lot of value from a block, and most of that value should ultimately flow to miners. It also created incentives for them to develop sophistication in extracting MEV. And this totally changes the dynamics of a blockchain and its mining layer. Two other kind of key insights here were that a lot of applications which looked kind of fair and open at first glance were actually not really fair if you took MEV into account, because a miner could get in front of you. They could manipulate your trades. There's all sorts of things that could be done in the presence of MEV that sort of broke how we think about applications. And the second thing is that what went on at the application layer posed a direct threat to consensus layer security. So in particular, if there's a lot of MEV, then a miner might have an incentive to do things to consensus that are destabilizing. Basically, nobody cared, though, about MEV for a couple years. No one listened to the authors of the paper and did anything about it. But in the summer of 2020, this is kind of the backdrop here of increasing economic activity with a lot more smart contract usage, a lot more tokens. Transaction fees were greater than block rewards, which is something that's happened on Bitcoin as of late. And we saw increasing sophistication within MEV, both because of these apex predator bots that could copy anything anyone was doing on chain and sort of take other people's MEV extraction strategies. But maybe most worryingly, at the time, we saw trading firms were developing relationships with miners, these backdoor deals where a miner would give the trading firm priority access in a block. The trading firm would send their transactions to a miner, and the miner would agree to include the trading firm first at the expense of everybody else. And this turned what used to be a open, transparent, level playing field to get your transaction included in a block into something closed, opaque, not transparent, no longer fair, and you needed to have social relationships in order to get these kind of deals. And that was really worrying, and that caused people to kind of wake up to MEV a little bit. And so what do we do about this? What were the decisions that were made? Ethereum needed to first kind of decide how it thought about the problem before it could make decisions. And this is my summary of what I think Ethereum's MEV philosophy is. So first and foremost is to prevent centralization at the consensus layer at all costs. So prevent mining from becoming more centralized, do what we can to decentralize it. And that means taking trade-offs that may be really painful, like making applications worse, so long as we can prevent centralization at the consensus layer. Second thing is related, but a slightly different point, which is to not make changes to the protocol that wouldn't hold in a decentralized environment. And so Ethereum is designed to be decentralized from day one, and Ethereum was not going to mitigate MEV in a way that would not be able to be decentralized in the future. An example of this is the Solana folks have tried to prevent some negative forms of MEV by going around and yelling at validators that do negative things. And that obviously doesn't scale if you don't have a centralized foundation that can yell at people and get them to do things. So that's not something that Ethereum has done, or a bunch of technical changes that might help in preventing MEV at the consensus level, but they just can't be decentralized. The final thing is that we try to keep the consensus layer decentralized, but we try to mitigate MEV at the application layer as much as possible, and are willing to do more things and have more flexibility at the app level. And that's kind of the philosophy that's been taken. So how did that manifest at first? The first way that this manifests was the MEV mining client fork. So this was developed by Flashbots. It was a fork of the dominant mining software. What it did was it allowed miners to outsource the top of their blocks to sophisticated parties that could find MEV, which we call searchers. So a searcher would submit an ordered list of transactions called a bundle, and we would run an auction for the top of the block at the mining pool's mining client. That meant that searchers were competing in kind of this efficient auction for access to the top of the block, and they were paying the miner for that access. And it was really nice because all that MEV value flowed to miners, which meant that they didn't need to implement arbitrage software themselves or become trading firms. And it was strictly more profitable for miners too, because you could have multiple block templates, one that accepted bundles from searchers, another that didn't, and just choose whatever is more profitable to actually build a block off of. The market structure for this is that miners would listen to an intermediary called a relay for bundles, and searchers would send their bundles to a relay. Again, searchers are these sophisticated parties that could extract MEV, and the relay was just this middle intermediary that was necessary in order to prevent DDoS on miners. And I won't get into the reasons for that, but that's kind of this market structure. Searchers send bundles to a relay sends bundles to miners include them in their blocks. Pretty straightforward. And why was this good? Well, first is that any miner, regardless of their size or sophistication, could now extract MEV on the same level playing field. So the smallest miner out there, not the smallest necessarily, but a small miner had blocks that were as valuable as the largest miner. And that meant that you, as a small miner, did not need to have the sophistication of a trading firm in order to compete with a large miner and a large mining pool. So this was really important because it prevented mining hash rate from centralizing any further. Is if only large mining pools with a lot of hash rate could extract MEV, then they would be able to produce blocks that are much more profitable than others, which would get more hash rate going to them. But instead, in this market structure, any miner of any size had access to the most profitable block possible. And they didn't need to be a sophisticated trading firm for that. So we prevented this vertical integration at the consensus layer, and we helped keep it decentralized. That was the first thing. Second thing is that any user could get fair access to Blockspace without needing a relationship with the miner now. So the kid in Romania or in Azerbaijan or somewhere in Africa or anyone anywhere in the world had fair access on the same level playing field as the best trading firms in the world. Now with this market structure, to instead of needing to go and form closed doors deals, which was happening before MEVGeth, in order to get access to priority block space. So we kept MEV open, permissionless, and transparent with this market structure, both for sending bundles as well as extracting MEV as a miner. The downside is that we introduced this trusted intermediary, the relay, and it introduced sandwiching, which gave users worse trade execution. When Ethereum moved from proof of work to proof of stake, the requirements changed slightly. So in proof of work, not all mining pools, almost all of them, but you had to be over a certain size, had access to MEV and MEVGeth. But here, the requirement was every staker of any size, from the smallest, newest staker to the largest, most well-known, needed to have equal access to MEV. And we wanted to also prevent entrenchment of any single party like Flashbots in our infrastructure. So those two requirements meant that we changed the market structure from MEVGeth to MEVBoost. MEVBoost is relatively straightforward. If you are a staker or a validator, you can outsource the construction of your blocks to a block builder who just specializes in block construction. Basically, the ordering of transactions in a block. It's a sophisticated party, and there would be many block builders who would compete to have their blocks included on chain by validators. So anyone can be a block builder, anyone can try to compete on ordering, offering features, creating the most profitable block. And since validators and block builders don't necessarily trust each other, we needed this third party called a relay to mediate between them. And that enabled permissionless collaboration, where on one side of the market, as a validator, you get the most profitable block possible. On the other side of the market, as a block builder, you get access to block space for all validators of all sizes. And what was good about this is that we prevented centralization at the consensus layer by ensuring that validators of any size had access to MEV from the smallest to the largest. And it opened up the marketplace for MEV to more competition, especially with infrastructure providers, which made it more robust and meant that a single actor like Flashbots, because we were the only relay in the proof of work days, was not entrenched. What was bad is that block building is a super sophisticated job, and only a small number of parties are actually competitive. And so the chain was increasingly relying on a small number of parties to facilitate MEV. And a lot of those top block builders and relays were censoring transactions that have been sanctioned by OFAC in particular. And so that meant that for a number of blocks on Ethereum, some percentage of them, OFAC transactions from parties that have been sanctioned by OFAC were not landing it into the block. The situation was not critical, I would say, because there were a bunch of builders and relays that did include those, as well as a bunch of proposers that were not outsourcing their block construction. Here's how MEVBoost developed over time. So within about 2 months of releasing in the merge, MEVBoost went up to 90% adoption. it sits at kind of a terminal regular level of something like 90 to 95%. The block building market started out, with something like 5 to 6 different parties that were competitive, but over time, it has increasingly concentrated to a small number of parties that could compete. Today, it is only 2 parties that can compete. Basically, the market is centralized to 2 because of the economies of scale in block building and dynamics with order flow. So Titan Builder and Beaver Build are the top 2 builders today. They build the majority of blocks on Ethereum, and there are pretty high barriers to entry to unseating those 2. Private order flow is widely adopted, so something like 40% of Ethereum's transactions go to a private mempool, not public mempool, which is up from about 20% last year for a variety of reasons. And if you look specifically at trades on decentralized exchanges, that number is even higher at about 80%, which makes sense because decentralized exchanges are really where you need MEV protection. You don't need it for everything that you do on chain. But this is pretty remarkable because 80% of transactions that really need MEV protection are going to a private mempool, and this is where a lot of the value in order flow on Ethereum comes from. It's worth saying a little bit about order flow because it's such an important part of the story, but order flow started entirely public in proof of work, and front running led to the adoption of private mempools. So if you just submitted an arbitrage in the public mempool, you would get front run, which meant that people started to look for private mempools in order to prevent their strategies from being copied or others from getting in front of their trades to give you worse execution. And eventually, democratization of this means that basically anyone who's trading on chain today does use a private mempool for that. A follow-on effect is that this has led to a lot of centralization in the block building market. A primary reason why there's only 2 block builders and why they have really high barriers to entry is that you need a lot of order flow in order to compete, and it's hard to get access to that. What's kind of interesting is that there are all these products now that are helping users do more than just prevent front running. They're helping them internalize value, like priority fees. So there are a bunch of products that will actually refund you your gas fees if you send order flow to them. What's not mentioned on the slide here is that there's a lot of stuff that applications are doing to kind of get more control over transaction ordering and to prevent their users from getting bad outcomes, making sure that they can internalize MEV, that they don't get front run. Application-specific sequencing is a really hot topic at the moment. And the key question to answer here for the long term is what kind of app or workflow centralization is acceptable for Ethereum and any chain, really. Sorry, I have to charge my laptop, which is why I got up. One future direction that's really important here is involving multiple parties in block construction. So Ethereum needs to have this separation between the party that is proposing a block, which is the validator, and the party that builds it. Because again, we want to keep the consensus layer of Ethereum decentralized, and to prevent needing to be a trading firm in order to compete, everyone needs to have access to MEV equally, which means we need to outsource block building to a specialized marketplace. But then what you get from this is that a small number of parties dominate block building, where they can introduce censorship. And the thought process here goes is, what if you don't only have a single party constructing the block? What if you have multiple parties that are each giving inputs to the block? Could you have a block builder build most of the block and then have someone else build a little bit at the end, or pen conversions at the end, or proposal list that says the block builder must include these things. And if you do that, then you increase censorship resistance because those parties may not have the same compliance needs that the block builder does. So there's a bunch of research that has gone into how do we involve multiple different parties in block construction. That's stuff like inclusion lists, where validators would propose lists of transactions that must be included in a block. You still allow the builder to kind of reorder transactions in any way that it sees fit, but you only consider a block valid if it includes a bunch of transactions that the validator said that they need to. What Flashbots is very excited about and we're working towards is decentralizing the block building role itself. So having many different parties be involved in the building of a block. And there's a final direction here called multi-concurrent proposers, which says, well, what if we have multiple different parties at the same time kind of attesting to what transactions should go in the next block? Not saying anything about ordering, but just saying transaction 1, 2, and 3 are in my mempool, they should go on a block. And then another proposer says 2, 3, and 4 are in mine. And you take the union of what all proposers have said should go into a block and apply a deterministic ordering rule to it, like sort by party, to give an example. And that gives you multiple parties involved in the process of building a block and fairly strong censorship resistance guarantees. I'll finish by just saying a little bit about a few different lessons from the MEV maze. We're approximately at the end here. First lesson is that it seems that censorship resistance is best achieved with two things. One, we just talked about, having many parties involved in block construction with a diverse set of inputs. And the second is geographic decentralization. So having these globally distributed networks be spread across all the world, where many different people with different preferences, different compliance needs, and different jurisdictions are involved in constructing a block. That is what seems to give you real censorship resistance. Second thing is that if you don't have an efficient way to extract MEV, you don't have an off-chain auction, you get an on-chain auction instead. You want to have MEV extraction infrastructure that is effective, or people will find a way to do it. Most commonly, the way that this is expressed is by spam, so using a lot of block space for not really productive ends, but people trying to extract MEV. So you want to do that off-chain before it lands on-chain. And finally, it seems like most, but not all, MEV can be mitigated at the app level. There's a lot that you can do to make MEV less harmful for users, to make it leak to consensus layer less, but it seems like there's always some amount of MEV that's still available that you want to extract and make available to all miners or proposers. So in summary here, Ethereum took an accelerationist approach to MEV. It said, let's maximize extraction at the protocol level to keep the protocol and consensus layer decentralized, because that's what is rational and not honest in a decentralized setting. And, if you're in a truly decentralized setting, you can't just go around telling people to be honest. You need to be rational. That's been pretty painful for Ethereum because it's done things like introduce sandwiching. It makes applications harder, but it's kept the consensus layer from centralizing. Order flow here is a big piece of the puzzle that remains unsolved. So there's a bunch of centralization of order flow, a lot of mitigations for MEV end up centralizing order flow to some extent. This has ended up being a really important part of its block building. It's unclear what the future of this is. And finally, basically everybody seems to agree that we should involve multiple parties in block construction, but no one has figured out exactly how to do that yet. There's a couple different proposals for doing that. Thank you for listening. I hope that was interesting. I hope it gave you some sense of MEV on Ethereum and how it's developed, and some ideas for how to handle MEV on Bitcoin. You can feel free to reach out to me if you ever want to talk MEV. I would love to. I'm Bert C. Miller on Twitter. Thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of the conference.